Greetings, everyone. Pete Pardo here from Sea of Tranquility. Welcome to another episode of Friday Morning at the Funhouse alongside Mr. Martin Popoff. As always, what's happening, Martin?
Yes, morning, sir. Morning, sir. I'm looking forward to doing this. As people don't know this, we've already had a long discussion about next week before this, but we'll see what we can do. But yes, looking forward to this on a nice chilly fall morning here in
Yes,
Toronto.
crisp fall morning, and we're going somewhere over the rainbow today, right?
Yep, absolutely.
Yes. So as I already announced on my Friday, my 9 a.m. show this morning, today's topic is going to be returning to this band's blank from a band, right? So we did Led Zeppelin a couple of weeks ago. Some people really liked the kind of different concept. Some people didn't quite get it and didn't like it. Hey, whatever. We enjoyed it because I think it made us look at albums in a different light. And just to kind of explain it a little bit further, and today's band of choice is Rainbow, by the way. We've been picking bands that have smaller catalogs, so we don't sit here for 2 hours going through this exercise. But it's like basically we're picking out bands who have unique albums that are varied in maybe sound and style and members, and maybe there's big breaks in between albums, things like that. But it makes us look at each album individually and like, well, what are some of the characteristics we give to this particular album? And then what other bands have similar type characteristics as that particular album? And again, just to clarify, we're not saying that these albums we're picking sound like these classic rainbow albums. It's not about sounding like or better or comparing them, weighing them together. It's more about certain characteristics that have to do with these albums, whether it's a debut album, it's well respected, but it's not quite fully fleshed out yet. It's a different lineup. It's a classic lineup. This album's got the epic on it. This one has the one-off lineup. Comes after a break. This is a released live album and compilation after they've already broken up, that sort of thing. So we're kind of going through lots of our collections and picking out albums that remind us in some way, has certain characteristics of these albums from Rainbow. Martin, I don't know if you want to expand on that a little bit before we get started with Richie Blackmore's Rainbow.
Yeah, so the funny thing is, we got a kick out of the comments. I mean, it was a strong reaction one way or the other. A lot of
Yeah.
people hated this idea, but that's interesting in itself, right? And a
Yeah.
lot of people loved it and thought it was fresh and interesting, and a lot of people kind of didn't get it. Um, and then we liked that, first of all, that it was a strong reaction. And then I remember you saying, hey, we got to enjoy doing the shows, and we enjoyed it, right? So and we thought right off the bat, Rainbow made sense to do this. Even I believe when we were even discussing doing this the first time, we thought if there was going to be a second one, it would be Rainbow, right?
Yeah.
And the neat thing about Rainbow is you've got these, everything's got a story about it, and it's not a super long catalog. So you've got those three original albums, you've got a live album mixed in there, you've got a Graham Bonnet album, you've got three with Joe Lynn Turner, you've got Final Vinyl, and you've got this one way off in the distance sort of thing too. So we thought that was sort of interesting. So and then I guess the other thing we learned from the comments also was it's a weird, obscure concept anyways. So we probably, and people said this, oh, this requires me to understand the Led Zeppelin albums, right? And so now this is a band that's even less famous than Led Zeppelin. But I think we all kind of understand these Rainbow albums, but we'll explain them a little more. So that's the one side of it. And the other side of it is that we figured we probably shouldn't be mentioning crazy, crazy obscure albums to compare them, because all of a sudden someone doesn't know the Rainbow album and doesn't know the other album, and they're really off in left field, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
so these are pretty normal albums, but I suppose it's a new way of looking at them by comparing them to Rainbow albums. So I'll give my first two here. So I would say that Aerosmith is Aerosmith's Richie Blackmore's Rainbow. And this is one of the ones that first came to mind for me, because I've always considered this album a little clanky, a little undercooked. The production's not great. The performances aren't great. Steven Tyler sounds weird. It's before they really get going. And I know probably, much more than Pete, I'm less of a fan of the first Rainbow album. A lot of people really love it. I mean, a lot of people think it's the best Rainbow album. But yeah, I figure there's a big lower quality level that you get with this album on your way to Get Your Wings. Yeah, it's just always kind of depressed me. It's just cranky and scrappy and garagey. So that's my first one. My second one is High Voltage, is AC/DC's Richie Blackmore's Rainbow. Similar idea. This is actually recorded well, but the songs just aren't there. They haven't sorted out what they're doing. There's covers. We know Richie Blackmore's Rainbow. One of the centerpieces of it is Black Sheep of the Family, and this has a few covers on it as well. And it's just again, it's not very heavy. The concept doesn't seem to be, fully fleshed out or realized. On Your Way to TNT and Dirty Deeds and all that, we really start to get the AC/DC sound. So yeah, to me, this is also the uncooked, not quite there concept of AC/DC. Had a couple other honorable mentions. Rock'n'Rolla by Judas Priest. I've always called that. To me, it sounds like the demo version of Sad Wings. Black Sabbath, possibly. It sounds like a little bit kind of all over the place before you get to, the heft and majesty of Paranoid. Killing Is My Business, but Business Is Good for Megadeth. I feel definitely sounds kind of clanky and dark and loose bolted, which is kind of the way I describe Richie Blackmore's Rainbow. Anvil, Hard and Heavy. So this is before you get to the two absolute classics from Anvil. And again, the concept isn't quite there. They haven't assimilated the new wave of British heavy metal in such a great way that would come out on Metal and Forged in Fire. Saxon, same sort of thing. Weak T version of Saxon before you get to Wheels of Steel. Starcastle for the album cover, the album covers match. So there you go. And Gillen, the Japanese album, I feel fits in here because you get the lineup in flux situation that you get on Rainbow en route to Rising. So there's my Richie Blackmore's Rainbow.
Cool. And I think Martin did a great job of explaining what the kind of criteria is of the Aerosmith album and why we're matching some of these. So I think that's key in both of us explaining what we looked at, what those characteristics are of each Rainbow album. So for me, the Rainbow album, I kind of agree with. I think for me, it's a debut album that is well respected. Some people think it's the greatest album they ever did. Some people think, like yourself, it's kind of a little half-baked, yet lineup's kind of still in flux, right? It's the original lineup. It doesn't last. So it's either for some, it's a classic, or for others, it's the band is on their way to getting there. So that's kind of the mindset that I used here. And my first selection is Robin Trower, Twice Removed from Yesterday, the debut album from him after he leaves Procol Harum. Again, it's got an early version of the lineup with Reg Isidore and Jimmy Dewar. It's not quite the classic that is Bridge of Sighs, obviously, but it's a pretty good on its own merits. I very rarely see anybody call this their favorite Robin Trower. It's definitely up there, but it's not quite the classic that the next one is, similar to Richie Blackmore's Rainbow and Rising. And then I'm going to go with Dawn Patrol by Night Ranger. Again, really good debut, strong debut. They would go on to do bigger albums, more commercial albums. Some people like the next two albums as their big albums. Some people do cite this as their favorite, but I think this is a very powerful start for them. I think they would only get better as a band going forward. So that's why I kind of picked them here as well. And then some honorable mentions, Leslie West Mountain. Right, even though this is a Leslie West solo album, and the first official Mountain album would be Climbing. You don't really get that classic Mountain album without this one. So I think this is the seeds of what's going to come later is here. So it's a good kind of foundation point. Same thing with Toto, self-titled debut. Again, a really good album, really strong album. It's got a bunch of hits. It sold really well, but they would kind of go on to do bigger things afterwards. And then I'm going to go with Cheap Trick, the first album. Again, really solid. Some people really love it, and I think that you can make a case for all these albums we talked about today that some people think it might be their best, but most others say, okay, they definitely got better as the next couple albums came up. So yeah, so those are my picks for Richie Blackmore's Rainbow, and these are all their Richie Blackmore's Rainbow. I should have said it the right way. I did it once again, Martin. I failed again 2 episodes in a row. I'll get it.
Well, you can redeem yourself for
going forward. Yes.
So, yeah. So to play some word salad, we've got Richie Blackmore's Rainbow. In a certain sense, we've got Leslie West's Mountain,
Yes.
as well, right? And then we've got Ranger becomes Night Ranger, and then Blackmore becomes Blackmore's Night later on, right? So we've got Night Ranger, Blackmore's Night. There we go. Richie Blackmore's Rainbow. All right, on to Rising. Okay. Let There Be Rock is AC/DC's Rising. So the reason I feel this, number one, we have this whole, like, when we were kids, everything was about heaviness. We measured heaviness. Rainbow Rising was the first perfect album where all 6 songs were heavy. There was no ballads, no light nonsense. Even every Black Sabbath album we know has light bits, and that disqualified them for us, right? So that album was a 6 out of 6 in 1976, and this was an 8 out of 8 in 1977. So in that respect, and also in another respect, this is very uniformly heavy and very electric sounding, very, very dirty electricity sounding, right? That was the whole big deal about this. They were burning up amps and blowing amps, as the stories go, and it sounds very sizzly, right? And I think Rainbow Rising also sounds very sizzly. So that's my first one. My second one is Machine Head is Deep Purple's Rainbow Rising. And the reason I believe this is because, again, it's the band really coming into their own, where you really feel the personalities of the band more so. It's still a little, it's new and fresh. Not exactly wobbly in Rock, but it feels even more wobbly on Fireball. But here it's like, this is the bold statement. It's everybody's favorite kind of Deep Purple album, or the consensus favorite. The production's good. Everything just sounds confident and bold on it, and we know that's what Rising feels like as well. As honorable mentions, I had Sad Wings of Destiny, same kind of thing, but also in a parallel, that it's the second album, so it's the big improvement on the second album. Ride the Lightning for Metallica, same thing, big improvement on the second album. Rise in confidence, super rise in songwriting ability. Kiss Destroyer for the Point of Ambition. That's probably Kiss's most epic album, depending on what you think of their concept album. But you could say that Destroyer is them getting epic, and it also happens to be the same year as Rising. And I put down Status Quo as well. Quo is my favorite Quo album, but I also put it down because it's the heaviest, and Rainbow Rising's pretty much arguably the heaviest Rainbow album. I think it's unarguably. And also, it also has that same sort of mid-rangey, straight between the eyes. It seems to be more about the guitars than the drum sound or anything like that. Like, the guitars are front and center, so it's got a really sizzling electric sort of feel. So that's my Rising.
Cool. So my points also for Rising, the characteristics. Second album, possibly. I have a couple I think that fit that mold. Deemed their classic by most people. Okay, possibly their heaviest and boldest sounding album. The classic lineup, right? It's got the classic lineup. That's another characteristic I used. And also contains their most popular epic song, right? So those are some of the characteristics that I used. Yep. And I'm going to get this right. So Lights Out is UFO's Rising. See, Martin, I can do
nice.
This. Again, this isn't a second album, but this is basically by many people considered their classic. It has the classic lineup, a lot of their great songs, great production, and it's got Love to Love, which is considered by many their best epic, kind of like Stargazer, right, type of thing. And then I picked Paranoid is Black Sabbath's Rising. So here we do have the second album, the classic lineup, by many people considered possibly their classic. I mean, a lot of people have different favorites, but I don't think most people would argue that this is considered one of their classic albums. And maybe the big epic gem on this album is, of course, War Pigs, right? So there you have that. And then honorable mentions, we're going to go with Medusa by Trapeze is their Rising, classic lineup, best album. And Nazareth's Hair of the Dog is their Rising. Again, it's got there's all their signature tunes on it. Most people cite it as their heaviest album. It's their biggest selling album, and most people call this the classic Nazareth album. So back
It's
to you.
also kind of dark and epic, right? And it's even got a dark and epic album cover to it, right?
Both of these fall into that category. They're both dark, and in fact, well, Lights Out I wouldn't say as much dark and epic, but Paranoid, Hair of the Dog, and Medusa for sure. Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, on to On Stage. I actually don't have a copy of Made in Europe, but I'll show a Made in Japan because I could have picked this as well, and I've often said it about this as well. But I'll say that Made in Europe is Deep Purple's On Stage. And the reason is it feels incomplete. On Stage always felt very incomplete to me. Bad track listing. It's long. It's got jammy songs on it. It doesn't have a lot of songs on it. Made in Europe, on the other hand, is only a single album, so it doesn't feel complete for that reason. It's got some of the same members in the band as well, just to be meta about it. And it's also the second album. I mean, it's a live album that comes after 2 albums, because it actually comes after 3 in the release chronology, but it's recorded before Come Taste the Band and after Stormbringer. So it comes after, and we never liked this as kids either, right? The idea that putting out a live album kind of premature. So Deep Purple Mark III put out a live album after 2 studio albums. And Rainbow's putting out a live album after 2 studio albums. So that's the reason for that one. And then I also don't have, well, actually it is in here somewhere, I believe. Yeah, I'm sure live is part of this stuff. Anyway, so live is UFO's On Stage. And by live, I mean the early days Mick Bolton UFO live album, right? So it's mixed into these somewhere, I think. I think we got UFO Flying and Live on these, or one or 2 of these. But the point is, again, not a great live album. It's actually a terrible live album, and I also think On Stage is a terrible live album. But basically, it's not a great live album. It's very incomplete. It's jammy, not very dynamic, and it also comes after a scant 2 albums. You've got UFO and UFO 2 Flying, and then all of a sudden, somebody thinks this great virtuosic terrible band is worthy of putting out a live album, right? So that's that. Honorable mentions, I had Quartz Live, because that thing came out super early as well. Kind of weird to get a live album from Quartz so early. No one cares. And talk about early, we've got Vardis 100 Miles Per Hour. Their very first album is a live album. And then Zeppelin's Song Remains the Same. And even I felt a little bit Live Magnetic Air. Something about that Max Webster live album just doesn't sit great with me. It doesn't seem amazing. Maybe because it is a single, and it would have felt more complete if it was a double. We basically always wanted these single live albums to be double albums, right? Maybe there's a show. The odd time that we were happy it was a single live album. Could be an idea, right? So in terms of incompleteness, so there's my On Stage.
Cool. So I probably like On Stage a little bit more than Martin does, but it's got its faults for sure. So some of the characteristics I used for On Stage was it came too early in the catalog, kind of incomplete. I also wanted to maybe pull out something that came a live album that came a little bit too late, right? And one that also came early, and strange set list and all that kind of stuff. So the first one that came to mind for me is Undead is 10 years after it's On Stage. I mean, this is the second album. Why do you release a live album after only one album? As such, it's not too bad, but it's very jammy and long soloing and all that kind of stuff. So it's got similar characteristics. And on the opposite end of the spectrum, Snaz is Nazareth's On Stage. I would have rather have had this early on after 2 or 3 albums, right? So we didn't get a 70s live album from Nazareth. We had to wait till the early 80s when they already were kind of changing their sound a bit. We talked about that on a previous episode, and the thunder of the band, the 70s, not quite represented on here. Keyboard player and everything, even though the track list is actually pretty damn good. So I remember initially being a little bit disappointed with that when it came out. And then honorable mentions, I'm going to go with Vandergraaf Generator Vital, which is, again, a weird live album that comes really late in their career, during the 70s when they got this brand new lineup, and they have one new studio album with the brand new lineup, and then they do a live album which has mostly songs from that album and a couple of old classics played by this new cast of folks in the band. So that's kind of like, it's kind of a weird live album for them. So there you have it.
Nice. Okay. Moving on to Long Live Rock and Roll. Draw the Line is Aerosmith's Long Live Rock and Roll. And for obvious reasons, they both had the same kind of album cover. The the hand-drawn, the rainbow's a little more sober and conservative and classy. This is the what's his name? Al Hirschfeld.
It's more cartoony.
Anyways, famous guy who drew a lot of like theater things in, I think, New Yorker magazine or New York magazine, something like that. Anyways, this guy's a famous cartoonist. But also, I also picked this because there's just a vague little bit of dissatisfaction. I love Long Live Rock and Roll. I love Draw the Line, but there's a vague dissatisfaction after Rocks moving into this. Rocks and Rising, both 76, and we're moving forward in the next one. It feels a little bit like less driven by intention. Just a little more all over the place. Rising just seems so forceful and amazing, and every song had to be there, and Rocks feels the same way. It just feels like delivered by the gods sort of thing.
It's kind of like a cracks are starting to show album, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Good way of putting it. So Draw the Line. And the other one, kind of a weird reason here. I'm going to go with Black Sabbath Volume 4 Volume 4 is Vol 4 is Black Sabbath's Long Live Rock and Roll. And the reason I picked this is there were certain things, and we've done the show about the early 70s versus the late 70s thing. To me, a Long Live Rock and Roll has a little bit of that depressing, overcast, clanky, mid-rangey sort of depressing thing that some of the metal kind of like spooked us a little bit about. And I always thought that a little bit about Vol 4. To me it seems like it was a little depressing compared to I just totally embraced Master of Reality and most of the other Sabbaths, but that one always seemed like there was just something despondent about it. And I think Long Live Rock and Roll feels a little bit scary, a little bit despondent, versus Rising for that matter. Honorable mentions, I guess I only had one here. I feel a little bit like this about Pete Townshend's White City as well, where you almost can see the overcast English sort of sky in that picture. It's kind of like a dreary Sunday afternoon album cover, right? And also it feels like the cracks are showing a little. It's a little bit less intentioned than All the Best Cowboys Have Chinese Eyes or Empty Glass. It just feels like the concept and the amazingness of what Pete was trying to do with solo albums in that time frame just got a little weakened for that third one. It just feels a little more fragmented, I guess is the other way of putting it. So that's my Long Live Rock and Roll.
Cool. Yeah, so my characteristics for Long Live Rock and Roll, it's kind of the end of an era for the band, right? So we've got some serious lineup changes coming after the album. I think it's also an album that's well respected by a lot of people and loved, but very rarely picked as their favorite, right? At least that I see. So those are some of the things that I looked at. So the first one that came to mind here was Who Do We Think We Are? Is Deep Purple's Long Live Rock and Roll. Again, kind of the cracks are showing, right? This will be the last album from the Mark II lineup for quite a long time. Most people like this album. I very rarely see someone say this is their favorite, but it's well respected in the catalog. And then Taken by Force is Scorpions' Long Live Rock and Roll. So the last album from the Uli Roth era of the band. He's out after this album. And then, of course, Matthias Jabs comes in shortly thereafter, along with Michael Schenker for a little spell. Well-respected album, end of an era for the band. Some people may say this is their favorite, some people not. It all depends on who you talk to, but there's that one. And then honorable mention, I'm going to go with Sacred Heart is Dio's Long Live Rock and Roll, last album with Vivian Campbell, right? Kind of the last album of the classic lineup. And then Eat a Peach is the Allman Brothers Long Live Rock and Roll. So basically the last album featuring Duane Allman and drawing a blank. Bass player. Oh my God.
Uh,
Jesus.
Barry Oakley.
Barry Oakley. Yes, thank you.
There we
God,
go.
I got
Yeah.
I got the olds this morning, Martin. So yeah, they're the last of the kind of classic lineup run from the band. So here we have Long Live Rock and Roll.
You know what? And I always, as soon as I heard King of Rock and Roll on Sacred Heart, I always lined it up with Long Live Rock and Roll, same lead singer, of course.
Yeah.
And both of those songs I feel like are a little substandard. On from these bands, they just don't seem as inspired as the other songs. They don't have the King of Rock and Roll is just both phrases are just kind of like dumb sounding, right?
Yeah, I mean, Long Live Rock and Roll, the title track I like, but
Mhm.
there's much better songs on that album, of course, right?
Yeah.
It's good. It's kind of bulldozing. It's all right.
Yeah. Okay, so over to Down to Earth. Motley Crue is Motley Crue's Down to Earth. So the idea here is that my favorite Rainbow album is Down to Earth, and it's the one with a different lead singer, and you've got John Corabi singing on this album, and a lot of people really like this album. We did the if you like this album, you're not a fan of this band thing, and a lot of people passive aggressively like putting down Motley Crue by saying this is their favorite Motley Crue album,
Right.
and it is a good one, and it's close to my favorite as well. It is a really good album. So yeah, that one feels like Motley Crue's. Down to Earth, and Assault Attack is the Michael Schenker Group's Down to Earth. Because again, there's great parallels here because it's the Graham Bonnet album. See, it's the only Graham Bonnet album. It's amazing. It's my favorite Michael Schenker Group album, just like Down to Earth is my favorite Rainbow album. And so it's got all those parallels. Just a gorgeous sounding album as well. And yeah, and then they're off to something else much more commercial. So there's that parallel as well. Honorable mentions, I had Heaven and Hell. Why did I put Heaven and Hell? I mean, I suppose it's the change of lead singer, and possibly a little bit more immediacy and commercial and accessibility of a certain sort. Yes, drama, for the obvious big change in lead singer, but again, very spiffy and also very, it's way up in my list of favorite Yes albums. And Slaves and Masters, put down because it's the only one with a different lead singer as well. So Slaves and Masters is Deep Purple's Down to Earth. So those are all mine.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, this whole concept of big line of change, maybe a one-off, right? That type of thing, little change in sound. I use the same criteria as well. So here, instead of a singer change, another perfect day is Motorhead's Down to Earth. So here you got a guitar slot change, right? Fast Eddie Clark gone, in comes Brian Robertson from Thin Lizzy. Kind of a different sound, sort of. It's more like a different guitar sound, really. Other than that, it still sounds like Motorhead, but this was to be a one-off. And again, some people, so, Martin's got the Down to Earth as his favorite Rainbow album, and I would agree. I think Assault Attack is the best Michael Schenker album. This ranks pretty high for me, up there with my favorite Motorhead album. I think it's quite good. And then Born Again is Black Sabbath's Difficult to Cure, the one-off album with Ian Gillan. I absolutely love this album. Does it sound different? Sure it does. When you got Ian Gillan singing for Black Sabbath, it's going to sound different. So there you have that. And then honorable mentions, I'm going to go with Wishbone Ash, Number the Brave is their Down to Earth. One and only album with John Wetton on bass and vocals, right? Quite a change, replacing Martin Turner, founding member. And then Deep Purple, Come Taste the Band is their Down to Earth. Of course, Tommy Bolin replacing Richie Blackmore. Quite different in sound, different guitar sound, a one-off. So moving on to Difficult to Cure.
All right. Constrictor is Alice Cooper's Difficult to Cure. So we've got a break, a change in sound. Alice Cooper is a long, serious break. He almost died. He's coming out of those Blackout albums. So he's coming back, newly charged properly for the first time, kind of for the decade. And Difficult to Cure feels like that as well. It's a rejuvenation. Joe Lynn Turner comes in. They're both in different ways going for an accessible sound, something that has some credence in an American marketplace. So I think Constrictor is kind of the start of that. Let's see. So here's a weird one. Hounds of Love is Kate Bush's Difficult to Cure. So I think you also feel an accessibility coming from the overt weirdness, as weird as she's ever going to get on the Dreaming. Here you've got more straightforward, geometric, synthesizer-driven songs. It's a big hit for her. It's very accessible, and I think Difficult to Cure is a very friendly, accessible album as well. Honorable mentions, I had Moxie Under the Lights. So that's the first and only Moxie album with Mike Reno. So you're bringing in a very Mike Renowski at that point before he goes on to Loverboy. So you're getting a very kind of like a weak tea version of Moxie. It's less raw, it's less guitar-y, and that's kind of what you're getting with Difficult to Cure. The Eternal Idol is Black Sabbath's Difficult to Cure. Again, change. There's a break. There's a lot of turmoil. New singer, pretty accessible. Saxon Crusader. I feel this is Saxon starting to really go commercial with Rainbow. Richie's kind of into Foreigner and things like that. With Crusader, Saxon's, trying to dip their toe into this new hair metal thing a little bit. Love It First Sting is Scorpions Difficult to Cure. Again, it's them just trying to be much more commercial than they were on Blackout. I think I'm not a big fan of Love It First Sting. Triumph Never Surrender feels kind of like the same thing, slowly moving into the 80s, moving into a new accessible sound. And the Who Face Dances. This is a new, friendlier Who. There's a significant lineup change, but it's just kind of like a poppier, more easy drinking version of the Who. And I think that's what you get with Difficult to Cure as well. There you go.
All right. So for me, yes, a lineup change signaling kind of a new era of the band. I took into consideration that the lineup change stuck for at least a few albums, and a slightly different sound, maybe moving into a new decade, maybe more commercial, that sort of thing. So taking it to the streets is the Doobie Brothers' Difficult to Cure. First album with Michael McDonald. First album leaning into a more kind of poppy sound for them. And this would continue on for a handful of albums, with Michael McDonald becoming more and more prominent in the band, songwriting and vocals. Seven Turns is the Allman Brothers' Difficult to Cure. So here, major lineup changes. Band is back together. You got Alan Woody and Warren Haynes now in the band. Band moving into the 90s after being apart for about a decade. New sound, yet it still sounds like the Allman Brothers Band, and of course, this lineup would stay together for the rest of their career. And honorable mentions, we're going to go with No Place to Run is UFO's Difficult to Cure. Schenker's Out, Tonka's In, slightly more accessible sound, and they would stick with this lineup for the most part, other than Paul Raymond popping in and out for the next bunch of albums. Season's End is Marillion's Difficult to Cure. Fish is out. Steve Hogarth is in. It's less kind of 80s prog, more kind of atmospheric, moving into the 90s. And again, this lineup would be the lineup going forward. So the start of a new era. And yes, 90125 is their Difficult to Cure. Moving into the 80s, band is broken up. They get back together, and Trevor Rabin's in the band. So we got kind of a new lineup here. Fresh sound for the 80s. It's very much more commercial, less 70s prog. And they would stick with this lineup for 3 albums going forward. So
nice.
On to
3 albums. See, there's a good one, right? 3 albums.
3 albums. Yep.
It's like Rainbow, right? So, all right. Beat is King Crimson's Straight Between the Eyes. So with Discipline, you get proof of concept. With Difficult to Cure, you get proof of concept, and you get the solidifying of the thing. This is my favorite King Crimson album. I know I get a lot of stick for that, but basically, and I think with Straight Between the Eyes, you get a slight improvement in production. It's a little smoother. It's a little warmer. I think you get that with this as well. It's a little more, the songs seem a little stronger as well. I wouldn't say Straight Between My Eyes is my favorite Rainbow album, but I definitely feel that with that. And then For Those About to Rock is AC/DC Straight Between the Eyes. And this is all about second time around as well, but also I think the warmest, most analog production of those three Rainbow albums is Straight Between the Eyes, and this is very puffy and warm. The last with Mutt Lange before they get fed up with them. So this is almost like the most comfy chair production of those two. This one and Back in Black. So I really feel that with that. And then honorable mentions, I had Kiss Animalize, again, proof of concept, maybe proof of new hair metal participation concept with Lick It Up into Animalize. Afterburner, you got proof of concept with Eliminator, and you're moving into the same sort of sound again. Michael Schenker Group, MSG. I think you get, here you also get kind of warmer, puffier production values, but proof and concept. It's the second Michael Schenker Group album. Tank Power the Hunter, again, second Tank album. So here's second of this new version of Rainbow, and same sort of thing with Uriah Heep Head First, second of a proof of concept of this new vital, different sort of lineup. And again, with that one, you're definitely in the most commercially accessible for that early 80s sort of feel, and that goes with the Rainbow as well.
Yeah, that's the whole proof of concept. Second album and a proof of concept. Second album of kind of like a lineup change or a sound change. That's exactly the same things I look for. My first one is Wind and Wuthering is Genesis Straight Between the Eyes. So second album with Phil Collins as frontman and lead singer. Second album with this slightly more pastoral prog sound, right? And of course, they would lose a member after this one. Steve Hackett's gone, and they would start another little kind of like era of the band there. And Awake is Dream Theater's Straight Between the Eyes. So this is the second album with James LaBrie on vocals. Second album in this kind of new proof of concept, new sound moving into the 90s after that first album with a different singer. And this follows, of course, Images and Words, considered their classic by many, but moves along in a similar direction. And then honorable mention, I'm going to go with Perfect Symmetry is Fate's Warning, Straight Between the Eyes. Continue again, the second album with Ray Alder on vocals. It kind of takes a more refined approach from the No Exit album, which was the debut with Ray on vocals. Continues on a kind of similar path of progressive metal for the band. So,
all right, okay, so Signals is Rush's Bent Out of Shape. They're both green. And more significantly, I feel like I've said this many times about Signals, is that where I think you get the best melding and marriage of the synthesizer sounds and the guitar sounds. So I think you get this really nice unified production sound on that album. It is my favorite Rush album. Bent Out of Shape, I feel, is the one where you really get a personality out of the band rather than ticking off the boxes of the various Rainbow styles that you might want or might expect, along with a few experiments. On the first two of the Joe Lynn Turner era, I think on this one, it almost feels like a concept album to me. There's so much personality on this album. There's so much mood and simplicity and spaces that it just feels like the most creative and artistic one of the three, the most confident, and I feel that in Signals as well. And then On the Edge is the Babies, Bent Out of Shape. It's by far my favorite Babies album. I don't really like the early version of the band. Love this version of the band, in particular this album. So it's my favorite of the more commercial sounding era, rather than the free blocky chalky, we sound like Detective, we sound like Widowmaker era. This is more of the just really good anthemic songs, almost towards a John Mellencamp or Springsteen or Sammy Hagar kind of direction. But yeah, really like this album a lot. So again, a very accessible and my favorite of the catalog. And then I had Antenna is ZZ Top's Bent Out of Shape, because in a certain weird way, I feel like it's the last of that era that starts with Dehumanizer, Eliminator. Because even though it's on RCA, it's the first of the RCA years, and it's leaving Warner, and it doesn't have the same album cover as the other ones. But so it's the fourth, but I feel like it's them finally getting it right. I feel like it's the one, like Bent Out of Shape, where they finally get this difficult, interesting alloy right, and it sounds amazing. And Antenna is that for me. It's by far my favorite of those four ZZ Top albums. And Johnny the Fox is Thin Lizzy's Bent Out of Shape. Because again, they're getting it right. I like it quite a bit more than Jailbreak. And it also has a very warm and analog sort of sound. I feel like it's where you get the best alloy, again, between this time it's between the bass and the guitar and the drums, whereas on Jailbreak, it's very toppy and tinny and high end. I think Johnny the Fox just reminds me of the sound, why I like Bent Out of Shape so much, because everything just everything sits beautifully in the mix. And I don't feel that's the case with the first two of the Joe Lynn Turner era. And did I have any honorable mention? I don't know. Those were my honorable ones. I'm done. That's my Bent Out of Shape.
Okay. So I use slightly different criteria for my Bent Out of Shape comparison. So again, I looked at third album from the newer band. I also looked at maybe less rockin' of the three. General consensus, maybe the least successful of the three, but that's arguable, obviously. So the first one I picked is Talk, is Yes's Bent Out of Shape. So this is the third and final album of the 90125 era of the band with Trevor Rabin. This comes, quite a number of years after 90125. Least successful in the eyes of many, still pretty decent, but yeah, this would be the final time we see that lineup recording an album together. Tusk is Fleetwood Mac's Bent Out of Shape. So while this is not the final album from this lineup, this is the third album from this new lineup of the band in following Fleetwood Mac and Rumors, and it would prove to be the least successful of the three. And I don't have any honorables for this one because this was a tough one. Bent Out of Shape I found was the toughest one to pick up.
Okay, all right. Well, I find the next one a little tough. So I'll go with Live Insurrection is Halford's final vinyl. And I picked this because final vinyl, to me, it's entertaining because it's action packed and there's little nooks and crannies, and there's stuff recorded from all over the place, and there's some studio things on there. And this has always been a great action packed live album. It's got all sorts of obscure rarities on it that he plays live, and it's got a little bit of studio stuff. So it's got a little bit of everything. It just moves forward, and you're always kind of excited what's coming. So it's a grab bag live album, and that's kind of what Final Vinyl feels like for me as well. And then I picked From Here to Eternity from The Clash, which is a late period after the band is broken up live album, so it fits Final Vinyl in that respect. And it's also got live performances from kind of all over the place, so that one fits there. The only other one I had for an honorable mention was Motorhead No Remorse. I've always felt that thing was a grab bag as well. It's got a little of this, a little of that. It's a compilation, but some new stuff as well. So it again was a double like Final Vinyl, where it was a neat odds and sods that kept you entertained. So that's my Final Vinyls.
Yeah, I mean, for me, Final Vinyl is something that they put out live albums, got some new songs or previously unheard songs from a band or a lineup that is no longer in existence. So that's kind of the criteria I use. So Earthbound is King Crimson's Final Vinyl. So this is a live album they threw out there after the lineup that appears on this recording is no longer even in existence. That's the Boz Burrell version of the band. He's already over in Bad Company, and Robert Fripp has totally put together a whole nother lineup of King Crimson. But here's a live album of the band you probably don't even miss anymore, right? Why not? Sure. And then Live at Last is Black Sabbath's Final Vinyl. So, of course, this is the past lives. This is the revamped version of this many years. But basically, a record label put out Live at Last when the Ozzy era of the band was no more, or the Dio-fronted band was already in existence. So they just kind of threw this out there because, again, Sabbath had no official live album in the 70s for whatever strange reason, right? So let's put one out there to compete with the existing lineup of the band. So, yeah, this was just thrown together, put out there. Pretty damn good, though, I will say. So that's all I got.
Okay. All right. Gamma 4 is Gamma's Stranger in Us All. So the idea here is that we've got this untethered, hanging out there in space, extra rainbow album in Stranger in Us All years and years later. Totally different lineup. This actually is a very legitimate lineup, but it also lines up with Stranger in Us All because I don't really feel like Stranger in Us All really sounds like a rainbow album. And this definitely doesn't sound like a Gamma album. It's got a couple of really amazing songs on it, but most of it is really all over the place. It's got nothing to do with the old Gamma. Unfortunately, I wanted to love it way more than I did, but I really don't. Darkness to Light is really cool. The Low Road Home is amazing, but a lot of the stuff in the middle is not that great. So yeah, Untethered, later album there. And then I thought I was gonna. I always get these confused, but there's Ian Gillan Naked Thunder. But what I really meant to put in was Toolbox is Gillan's Stranger in Us All. And the funny thing about this one, so it's I've told this story before, but I remember having a hotel room interview with Ian and pulled this out and got this signed, and it's like, I remember at the time we were all, fretting. Oh, is this a Gillan album? What's going on? And he looked at it and goes, "Oh, I didn't know it just said Gillan on it. I thought it was an Ian Gillan album." So he just literally laughed it off, sort of thing. So because it just says Gillan and it uses the logo and everything,
Yeah.
like we were all, oh, how do we fit this into the Gillan catalog? Oh, our Gillan catalog's a big mess now, right? And it doesn't sound like the old days, of course, either.
No. Pretty good album though.
But yeah, but that's Untethered, and it may as well be Naked Thunder for all we. So it's really, Ian thinks it's an Ian Gillan solo album, right? So and what else do I have? Soundgarden, King Animal. We've got this Untethered later album, good album. Genesis, Calling All Stations. The Stooges, both of them. The Weirdness, just to pick one of them, but the Stooges is this old band doing this old thing long back, and all of a sudden they come back and attempt to make new Stooges albums, right? Triumph, Edge of Excess totally feels like that as well. Rick Emmett's not even in the band. So you've got this Untethered, much later album that really doesn't sound like the band. It's too heavy, basically, to sound like old Triumph. So those are all my Stranger in Us Alls.
Cool. Yeah, so I also took this kind of whole concept of untethered version of a band that puts out an album way after the fact, and I decided I wanted to pick one that really works and one that doesn't work at all. So the one that doesn't work at all, Southern Native, is Blackfoot, Stranger in Us All. So here this comes out a million years later as Blackfoot. There's no Ricky Medlock or anybody else associated with the previous lineups of Blackfoot playing on it. Ricky's involved. He's managing the band. He helps them write songs, but he's not a part of it. He didn't tour with them. It's just really bizarre. It's not terrible as a Southern rock album, but you look right there. Does that look like Blackfoot? Yeah, I don't know. Mohawks and Blackfoot do not compute to me. Sorry. One that does work, however, is The Symbol Remains, is Blue Oyster Cult Strangers in Us All. So here, this is an album that came out 20 years after their last one. For some, it's got a suspect lineup because you really only have Buck and Eric in the band and a bunch of new guys, although the new guys have been around for a long time too. For me, this is where this whole concept really works. Whereas Stranger in Us All, I think it's got some good songs, but does it sound like a rainbow album? Maybe not. I think this sounds like a classic Blue Oyster Cult record, and it's pretty well respected by most people. So that's that. And I will, as an honorable mention, Fleetwood Mac's Say You Will is their Stranger in Us All. Late period album after lots of lineup changes. Most of the band gets back together, but there's no Christine McVie here. It's pretty decent for what it is. I wouldn't say it's one of their best albums, but it's pretty solid. And but it feels like not whole, right? Something's missing. And with this lineup of the band, you almost like you have to have all those classic members in the band to make it a true Fleetwood Mac album.
Nice. Cool.
We did it, Martin.
Absolutely. Yeah. We'll see what they say about this one, but
I know, right? Cool. So I urge everybody, I think it really, to understand this concept, you actually have to go through the motions and do it. So for those of you who know these rainbow albums, right? Sit down and go from album to album and think, well, what are some of the characteristics that I like or don't like about this album, or that stick out like a sore thumb, right? And write them down. And then go look through your collection of all these other bands and say, well, what other bands had an album that kind of fits some of this criteria? because I think that's the fun in doing this, is actually going and thinking of albums a little bit differently and saying, well, there are similarities here that maybe don't have a lot to do with sound, right, or style of music. I think that's the key. And it really, it's pretty eye-opening what you can kind of come up with. So, again, not everybody's going to love this topic. We get it. But we've enjoyed doing it because, again, it's talking about albums in a little bit different way, which I think is kind of for us pretty refreshing. So, Martin, what's going on? Books and contrarians and podcasts. What's happening on your neck of the woods?
Yeah, so we had our Contrarians album cover show the other day. Creepy and unsettling album covers. Actually, book wise, let's see if I have it handy here. Do I have one here? Oh yeah, I do. Okay, so this is brand new, In the Groove. I only write a fifth of it, so it's a co-write with some people, but this is all quarto, and it's all about vinyl collecting, album covers, the history of vinyl, record stores, all that sort of stuff, classic record labels. So that just came out. Got those, and of course we got this one still, the Who and Quadrophenia still available, and then this is brand new as well, Kiss at 50, right?
Yeah, it's a nice looking book.
Hardcover of the Kiss stuff. So all that's available, martinpopoff.com. And of course, I've got my audio podcast every week as well, History in 5 Songs with Martin Popoff. The last one was about sequencing on vinyl albums. So I picked 5 positions on vinyl albums and talked about the characteristics. Side 1, track 1, second track, end of side 1, start of side 2, end of side 2. So there you go.
Yeah, that whole art of sequencing, I think, with the CD era got kind of lost for a bit, right? And
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I've been threatening to. I'm not sure yet, but I might actually do CD sequencing as the next episode. So not sure.
So I don't know. I didn't tell you, but so I reviewed the new Albert Bouchard Imaginos 3 album that came out just recently, and it actually, as I was reviewing the album and listening to the album, I was actually finishing up your Flaming Telepaths book on Imaginos. So in reviewing the album, I was talking a lot about the whole concept and how, in order to understand this whole thing, you have to go read Martin's book. And even after you read Martin's book, you may not understand the whole concept thing. I'd say, could you spend like maybe a minute or two talking about how you did all that research? I mean, there's all these kind of like weird, what seems to be unassociated facts of all the pre-World War I stuff. I mean, that must have been, what was it like to put all that stuff together?
Yeah, well, the thing I'm just dying to get finished because it's almost done is I got a follow-up to that book that is 3 times as insane as that book. Like, it's really nuts. And I've got 25 pictures drawn. And so I want to get 14 more pictures drawn before I put it up, but it's longer and it's crazy. I think I'm going to call it Perfect Water. The Rebel Imaginos. So it's the follow-up to Flaming Telepaths. And yeah, I loved that Flaming Telepath book. That's my favorite thing I've done so far, basically. And this is even more so. It's nutty. It's absolutely off the charts. but yeah, so I mean, basically that Imaginos story, it would take a lot to explain. But the idea is that the one thing Sandy said is it explains the occult origins of World War I, right? But it's also mixed up in the whole Lovecraft thing. So it starts earlier with the old ones, and then Imaginos is around, I think it's from like 1804 leading all the way up to World War I, and then he's getting in. So what I did with that book is I went down every single rabbit hole kind of thing and added stuff to it to fill in the blanks of what Sandy might have wanted to say, because the fact of the matter is he only left this handful of a dozen lyrics or whatever. There's really no particular more notes or anything like that. Nobody's found anything else that Sandy said about it. There's the explanation on the back of the Imaginos album, or the inside of the, a little bit on the back, and I think more on the inside of Imaginos. So Albert's been in the process of realigning it to what he thought the original album should be and adding a few things. And that book adds a lot of things, right? It really starts to, it basically, I'm trying to fill in the the mortar between the bricks, the few bricks that Sandy did. But because, this guy's a shapeshifter and a time traveler and all this, and he can become, an important political figure at this time and that time. And because there really are no occult origins of World War One, more of that comes into World War Two. That's why I brought in Crowley and Austin Osman Spare and German symbolist art and all that sort of stuff, and Vril Society and all those crazy things that were kind of bubbling under coming up to that, to find some occult things. So basically, I had to find a bunch of occult things that ramp up to World War One, but that starts as kind of like 1875. Aleister Crowley's born, and there's a lot of Crowley in Flaming Telepaths book, but so that World War One starts 1914. So you had to come up to all that, and then the assassination of the Archduke Ferdinand and all this sort of stuff. So there's a scrambled version of the whole thing. I've done a couple of 1 hour interviews on the thing as well. But yeah, I'm glad you took. I don't know how much of it you actually read. Flaming Telepaths. It's hard.
I read the whole thing. I was like,
okay.
I'm reading it. I'm like, you didn't have Sandy sitting next to you feeding you all this? I'm like, how did Martin come up with all this stuff? It's like,
well, and like I say, 90% of it is beyond what Sandy did, or beyond what Albert is doing. And people have said, we feel like you're now even more part of this Imaginos process than what was there to begin with. And so it sold really well. And yeah, I'm just dying to get the next one done, because it is an absolute mind exploder compared to that. Like that's conservative compared to what the second one is.
I have a buddy who's a big fan of Imaginos and is always like brought up in conversations, like, what is this really about and whatnot. And he's also into like war history, and he's also into some of the occult stuff. So as soon as I finished the book, I sent him a text. I'm like, you need to read this book. I'm going to send it to you tomorrow, and tell me what you think. So it's on its way to him right now, and I know he's going to dig it. So I was like, I applaud you, because it's a completely different book than anything else you've ever done. And I held off reading it for a while until I knew I got a few things off my plate. I'm like, all right, I'm going to read this now. And it worked out perfectly, because I was getting ready to review Albert's new album. So it kind of went hand in hand. I said, I need to read this while I'm listening to this album and getting back into the whole Imaginos frame of mind, because you have to do that. You have to get into a frame of mind to deal with this whole concept and everything like that. So good stuff. Yeah. So for folks who have not read it yet or don't know about it, it's called Flaming Telepaths. It's available on Martin's website. If you want lots of insight that you maybe pondered or didn't ponder and didn't even think you'd go down a rabbit hole like this about the whole Imaginos storyline created by Albert and Sandy Pearlman, go check out Martin's book. So anyway, there you have it, everybody. This is on the web at www.seatranquility.org. We're on Facebook, we're on YouTube, all together, all the damn time. Coming up in just a few short hours, Ken Golden will be coming in, and we'll be looking at some of the professor's picks, new releases today here on this Friday, the 13th of October. It's Friday the 13th, folks. And then on Sunday, we've got ranking the albums. Davey Gallagher will be coming in, and he and I will be ranking the catalog, or our top 10 favorites of Barclay James Harvest, the very cool British symphonic rock prog band from the 70s, who are still around in some form or another today. So they've got a lot of albums. We're going to be giving you our top 10 favorites. So that's coming up on Sunday. So till then, for Martin Popoff, I am Pete Pardo. Thanks for watching, everybody. Have a good weekend. Take care.